Hello friends, welcome back to your channel Demysty of Frontend, and this is yet another video in the series Build Your Own Angular Forms, where we are creating Angular form package from the scratch just to know how a scalable and configurable package is created in Angular. And in the last video we started with another use case of the ng model implementation, that is validation. So on your screen, as you can see, this is the complete picture of the validation process which takes place behind the scenes when you apply a validation directive on your form control. So we discussed the different parts of the validation process, and we also discussed how they connect with each other to make the validation process possible. So in this video we have picked one of the components in the validation process, that is form control. So we will deep dive into it. We will also implement it. So let's understand the role of form control in the entire validation process first, and then we will implement it, and we also write the unit test case to test our implementation. So first of all, we have to understand what is form control and how it fits in the entire validation process. So what happens when you apply the ng model directive on a form element and you also apply some validation directives? So ng model will create an instance of form control behind the scenes, and through that instance it will track the value, validity and errors for that form element. And ng model will also expose some key information from the form control instance, like if the form element is valid, invalid, or if it has any errors, so that we can make use of those flags in the template, and we can show and hide errors on the basis of that. Form control tracks the value, validity and errors for a single form element. Similarly, we have some other sibling classes, form group, form array and form record, which does the same thing, tracking the value, validity and errors, but not for a single element but for a collection of form elements. And these classes are doing the same thing, so there is a lot of functionality which is common across these classes. So that's why Angular put up all the common functionality in the abstract control class, which all these derived class can extend from. Okay, so let's start our implementation. Okay, so let's create the abstract control class first. Let's go to the form source and model. So there is a folder model, and let's create both the classes form control and the abstract control right here. So let me create the abstract control first. Okay, so this is our abstract control.ts file, and let's create the class quickly. This class will accept one generic type variable by the name t value. Okay, and we will assign it to the value variable. So value is a class level variable where we keep a track of the value of the form control, and let's annotate it with this generic type variable t value, and we also give it a default value any. Okay, so as you know, a form control will keep a track of value, validity and the errors. Okay, so we should have a flag which will tell us whether a form control is valid or invalid. Okay, so for that we create one more class level variable status, and we give it a type form control status. Okay, so let me quickly define the type, a type form control status, and the form control status can be something valid or invalid. Okay, and let me quickly define two variables holding the valid and invalid status. Okay, so when the form control is created, initially it should be valid, so we assign it the valid status initially, and we also keep a track of errors inside this abstract control class. So we have to define one more class level variable, that is errors. And first let me define the type. What will be the type of errors? So error is something, it's a simple object having key value pairs, so where we have key as the strings and value can be anything. So let's annotate the error with this validation error type, and if the form control is invalid, only then it will have the errors, otherwise the errors will be null. So it will be either of these, either the validation errors or null. Okay, and initially, since the form control is valid when it's created, so initially errors are null, so let's assign it null. Okay, so now this form control, it should also accept a validator function which it will use to calculate the status and the errors of the form control. Okay, so we will keep one private variable which holds the validator function, which it will call to calculate the validity and the error and the status of the form control. So let's name it validator function, and let's annotate it with a type. Let's say validator function. So let's define this validator function, what it is going to be like. So let's define one interface. So it will be a function which will accept a control of type abstract control, and it will return either the validation errors or null. If the if this control is invalid, then it will return the error having type validation errors. Otherwise, if the form control is valid, then it will return the null. Okay, so let's give it a type. Okay, we have already given it this type, and initially it is null, right? So setting a validator function on the form control is entirely optional, so it can be null as well, and annotate it with null as well. Now we must have some method using which we can assign a validator function to the form control. Okay, so it takes a function of type validator function, and it will simply assign this to the class level variable validator function. Okay, now, and let's also define one more method. So it's an abstract method which the form control, all the classes which derives it, they have to this implement this method, and that's set value, which again accept value which is of type t value, and what it returns nothing, so it returns void. Now to have an abstract method, we have to annotate the class with the abstract, right? So let's make this class abstract as well. That's it. Okay, and now, so this is one of the most important method which we are going to define now, and you must have used it a couple of times whenever you are adding a new validation or removing a validation at runtime, right? So you have to call that method whenever you update the validation on a form control, that is update value and validity. So now you will see what it does in actual. So when this method is called, what it will do, it will run the validation, it will run the validator function, and it will calculate the status and the errors. Okay, so let's calculate the errors first. So we assign the errors here. So for that we have to call some method, something like calculate errors. Okay, so let's define this method. So again, it's a private method. Let's define it. So this calculate errors, what it will do, it will return either a validation errors or null, depending on whether your form input is valid or invalid. To calculate the validation errors, it will have to call the method. It will have to call this validation function, right, which is captured through this set validator. So first we should always check if we have the validator function, because there are chances we don't have any validation, right, on the form control. So if we have the validator function, then we will simply call it, and what we will pass the control. So this points to the instance of the form control, and if we don't have the validation, then we simply say null, we don't have any errors, and we assign it to the errors class level variable, right? And similarly we will have to calculate the status as well. For that we will define one more method, calculate status, and it will return the validation status or form control status, which is valid or invalid, right? So simply check if we have the errors. If error is a non-null value, then that clearly means like this is invalid, status is invalid, otherwise status is valid. Okay, and now let's create the another class, that is form control, which we are going to use in the ng model. Let's name it form control. So this class will extend our abstract control class. Okay, and it also accept one generic type variable by the name t value, give it default value as any, and we will pass that generic type to the abstract control, right? Okay, let's now since we are extending the abstract control, so we should have the implementation for this set value. So let's add the implementation. So what it will do, it will simply assign the value, and it will call this method from the parent class, that is update value and validity, so that it can update the remaining flags, that is errors and the status. Okay, so this is it regarding the implementation. Now we will also write the unit test cases just to test if everything is working fine. I have already written a form control spec file here, form control spec.ts, and here I have written all the unit test cases. So we will cover each other unit test case one at a time. Okay, so this is the first test case, that is control is valid initially, right? So as you saw in the abstract control, what we do, we create, when we create the instance of form control, we assign the status as valid to the form control, right? So we expect the same, like when the control is created initially, it should be valid. So let's check. Yeah, so this is green, means it pass. Let's move to the next test case, and in the next test case we test, like, okay, if we set a value and if we don't have any validation, so we have not set any validation on the control, and when we set the value, then it should not have any effect on the status and the error flags, right? Because we don't have any validation, right? If you remember what we did when we calculate the error, we checked if we have any validation. If we don't have, then we return null, right? And so that's what we expect. Let's check it. Yeah, it is also green. Now let's move to the next test case, that is, now suppose you set a validator function. So first what we do, what we create a spy, and we expect the spy to return null, and we pass this spy as a validator function using this set validator. In this test case, what we expect when we set the value and we have the validation in place, then our form control should run that validator function, right? So here we expect spy to have been called with control. So if you see, when we run the validator, so this is our calculate error function where we run the validator function, right? And we pass it the control. So that's what we expect from the test case as well. Let's check. Yeah, it is also working fine. Okay, let me correct the sequence of test cases. So this is our first, second and third. Control should call the validator function with control as argument. So it is working fine. Now the next test case is control is valid if validator function returns null. Yes, so if our validation does not return any error, so it returns unknown null value, then it's an error. But if it returns a null value, it means validation is passed, there is no error on that form control. So in that case we expect status to be valid and errors to be null. So this is again create a spy, expect it return value as null, and then set the validator function and then update the value through set value method. So let's check. Yes, control is valid if validator function returns null, so it is also passed. Now this is our last test case where we have a validator function which returns a validation error, right? So in this case, our test case, so let's check our test case. Yeah, so it also passes. Control is invalid if validator function returns non-null value. Okay, since it's a non-null value, so it's a validation error, so that's why it will return the same validation error which is returned by the validator function, assign it to the errors flag, and it will calculate the status as invalid. So that's all from this video. I hope you like it, and if you like the content, then please like and share. Thank you very much.